What's up? Welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host, Sarah. As I was contemplating what topic we were going to cover today on the show, I had initially thought about returning to spiritual content. Then, not long after that, I saw a post about Putin, who Trump just met with. And the post said that Putin was planning to oust the Rothschilds from all of Russia's operations and everything to do with Russia. And the person who posted that went on to draw the conclusion that Trump would be doing the same thing. In other words, that Trump would begin the process of dismantling the establishments that control the affairs in the United States in the same way that Putin has claimed that he's going to do in Russia. So I felt that it was important to dispel that myth, because I would contend that Trump has no intention of doing any such thing. We've documented in our past shows the close connection that Trump has to the establishment being led by the Rothschild family. So we're doing part 12 of our series, Donald Trump, Insider or Establishment. And our objective is to further make it clear the connection between Donald Trump and the establishment, also known as the deep state and other euphemisms, to confuse people, essentially. So we're going to go into some of those connections. There's so much material that I have access to. It's hard to know where to start, but we're going to go back to a source that we were reading from before. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this article up and bring this to the forefront, and we'll read this information into the record. Let's see. Okay. Let's remove this. Okay, so we're going to go back to this article. And this article was published by the Fitzpatrick, or published in the Fitzpatrick Informer by Timothy Fitzpatrick. This is his publication. And here we see Donald Trump in a picture with Mike Wallace, the former CBS broadcaster, KGB Mossad super spy Robert Maxwell in the tux in the right with the blue bow tie. The man in the middle with the glasses is Senator John Tower, who was involved in Maxwell's KGB Mossad ProMIS software scandal, which was a technology theft for the Soviets. And he says, incidentally, Tower himself was sexually compromised by the Soviets. An interesting theme, which we've talked about before. This photograph is likely taken at a party on Maxwell's yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, his daughter, named for his daughter, in New York in May 1989. It's likely that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were on board this yacht. And this is there's a portrait. There she is, right here. A portrait of Ghislaine is situated between Wallace and Robert Maxwell on the wall in the background. Here again is that picture or portrait. Okay, so this was published in June 3rd, 2018. And it says, why and for whom had convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and his alleged procurer? And mind you, again, take note of the date of this article. This is long before the current times where the relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Maxwell has been currently brought into the public awareness as a result of back in March, I believe it was, where there was a falling out between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, which ended up resulting in Elon Musk basically outing Trump as having a close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And part of the thing that I want to point out is that much of this information had existed long before now. Okay, so we don't need the so-called Epstein files to be released. This information was already in the public domain. The list is already in the public domain. We went over the list in one of our prior shows. We've seen some of the manifests of people who were on the Lolita Express, which was Epstein's airplane. So this is not new information that's coming out. This has been in the public domain for a long time. So that's my editorial on this. So again, it says, why and for whom had convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and his alleged procurer girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, bugged the sexual encounters between his elite friends and children and prostitutes? Was it merely for billionaire Epstein's gain, or was it for someone else? Was Epstein the ringleader, or was it actually his girlfriend? It seems unlikely that the already rich Epstein did it for his own blackmail purposes. It's difficult to find a clear motive. Epstein doesn't seem like a politically ambitious character. Instead, he seems content with his billions in sexual license. What seems more likely is that Epstein and Maxwell were doing it for a third party. Let's continue to speculate, as we have for the breadth of this series, that the third party is Israel's bloody spy agency, Mossad, and about what they stood to gain from Epstein's sexual blackmail of prominent people, especially U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump rides Lady Ghislaine in Mossad supercell. And there you see Mossad asset Robert Maxwell next to the Lady Ghislaine, the yacht. It goes on to say, Donald Trump revealed in 2002 that he had been friends with Jeffrey Epstein for 15 years. And indeed, we read from the article in the New Yorker, or the New York magazine, I believe, where they were basically doing a profile on Jeffrey Epstein. And this was long before he had been indicted for his sexual harassment and abuse of children, female children. And it was there that Donald Trump quoted him saying he's known him for 15 years and he's a great guy. So we saw that that statement in the New York Magazine that they're referring to here in this article. That would put the start of their friendship around 1987, although it's possible their friendship began earlier. The late side note, and we'll get to this information sometime later, but it appears that part of how they ended up hooking up was that there was their mutual interest in young women. And you may recall that Donald Trump was the owner of, I think it was the Miss Universe pageant. And that he also had an association with a model agency. And the model agency was owned by someone who recruited young underage women, and it had been alleged about him that was his modeling agency was involved in sex trafficking young women. Okay, so back to the article. The late disgraced Mossad super spy and media mogul Robert Maxwell, Jewish name, Abraham Leib Hoke, of a Hasidic Jewish Czech family, the father of Epstein's alleged child sex procurer, Ghislaine Maxwell, held a party on his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, named after his favorite daughter, sometime in the spring of 1989. Guess who was at that party? Donald Trump. Also on board, according to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, were Ghislaine Maxwell, former U.S. Senator John Tower, who we saw in the picture of Iran-Contra scandal infamy, and other prominents like ex-Navy Secretary John Lehman. Whether Epstein was at that party is anyone's guess, but it's certainly plausible as Robert Maxwell had extensive dealings with bankers and financiers, including the Rothschilds, his trusted friends Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers. You'll remember from the first part of this series that Trump's yacht, Trump Princess, was purchased from Mossad asset and major Iran-Contra player Adnan Khashoggi. Maxwell's $12 million pound yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, was purchased from one of Khashoggi's brothers. As we will see, Maxwell himself was a significant player in the Iran-Contra affair on behalf of Israel's Mossad and to some extent the Soviet Union. So now we have established not only a long-standing relationship between Trump and Epstein, but also between Trump and two Maxwells, Robert and his daughter Ghislaine. Trump's late father, Fred, personally may have known Maxwell as well, as Fred was involved in major real estate projects that would have interested characters like Maxwell and his money laundering thug pals in the Soviet Union, who laundered much of their dirty money through New York and Florida, two places in which Donald Trump has primary residences. Donald Trump and Ghislaine could be friends, business partners, acquaintances, or perhaps something more. The trio, including Epstein, has been spotted together on multiple occasions, including when Golf magazine writer Michael Corcoran sat with Trump, Ghislaine, and Epstein on Trump's private plane in order to conduct an interview. And there's a link to that interview there. In 2007, Ghislaine Maxwell was photographed with Ivanka Trump's future brand officer of her clothing company at the Felix Ray Valentine's Day party in New York City in 2007. Trump and Ghislaine may have been intimately involved with each other. Whatever the case, on board Lady Ghislaine that day in 1989, Trump was in the hands of a Mossad supercell. And we know from current information that Trump has met with Ghislaine Maxwell. She has requested that she be pardoned. Trump seems happy to consider that. And in the wake of that meeting, Ghislaine Maxwell is now on work release from prison. And we'll read this article right here from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It says, on their toes. One thing about the party aboard British media mogul Robert Maxwell's yacht, everybody but everybody had to doff their shoes before boarding the plush-carpeted Lady Ghislaine. Maxwell insisted and his guests cooperated, including Donald Trump, minus Ivana, who has a much bigger yacht and was happy to compare them with Maxwell. Guests sipped champagne, nibbled caviar flown in from Paris on the Concorde, and salmon served from the vessel's stores by shoeless waiters. There was John Tower, former senator and thumbed-down defense secretary, ex-Navy Secretary John Lehman, now with Payne Webster, lawyer Tom Boland, literary agent Mort Jankloff, UN envoy Thomas Pickering, Peter Calco, owner of the New York Post, Maxwell's daughter Ghislaine, and Max's niece, Helen Atkin of Macmillan, the publishing house Maxwell recently took over. Maxwell, who weighs about 300 pounds, went over the guest list personally. No one could tell who didn't make the final invitation list, but we do know that Martha Smilgis of Time was invited and then disinvited. She wrote the profile of Maxwell for the magazine, which he apparently didn't like. And there we see one of the infamous photographs of Donald Trump. What's her name? Not Ivana, but Melania. Sorry, Melania Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and Ghislaine Maxwell looking lovingly at Jeffrey Epstein. And here, this picture was taken at Trump's Mar-a-Lago club, February 12, 2000. And it notes that Epstein's residence is just a few blocks away from Trump's. Robert Maxwell, Soviet-friendly Mossad super spy. In that same year Trump was riding Lady Ghislaine, Robert Maxwell was extremely busy scheming and scamming his way to riches and power, simultaneously working for himself as publisher of his British media empire. Mossad, the Soviets, and organized crime, all of which benefited each other in multiple ways. Maxwell biographers Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon write, Maxwell used the power of all those newspapers to attack Israel's enemies, and that he had acquired a rare and privileged position in the communist world. When Maxwell wasn't making hundreds of millions hawking Mossad's pirated and bugged version of Bill Hamilton's promised software to intelligence agencies, governments, and criminals around the world, even penetrating the United States' most secure nuclear installation, Sandia National Laboratories, Maxwell was helping Jewish Soviet mob bosses like Semyon Mogilevich, money launderer, through various world banks and through Maxwell's complex web of dummy corporations. In the fourth part of this series, we learned of Trump's role in helping Mogilevich syndicate launder money through his real estate adventures. Mogilevich also got his hands on a copy of Promise, which was allegedly sold to Osama bin Laden, among others, and brokering deals with likes of Soviet presidents Mikhail Gorbachev, Leonid Brezhnev, who was purported to be close friends with Maxwell, as well as KGB boss Vladimir Khrushchev, the main player in the staged August coup against Gorbachev and Perestroika. Maxwell helped Mogilevich obtain an Israeli passport through the Mossad. Perhaps it was Maxwell who first introduced Trump to Mogilevich and other Jewish oligarchs and crime figures. Perhaps they even met on the Lady Ghislaine that day in 1989. Perhaps this is when the Soviets, through mobsters like Mogilevich, first recognized the potential to blackmail and groom Trump as an agent of influence. Former FBI Director John O'Neill, who died his first day on the job, September 11, 2001, as head of security at Larry Silverstein's World Trade Center, told journalists that Maxwell's complex money laundering schemes became the model for Soviet and other organized crime syndicates. Evidently, Trump would go on to walk in Maxwell's footsteps, providing channels for Soviet oligarch loot stolen from the mostly peasant millions upon millions of victims of communism in Russia and Eastern Europe. The reason why I said wow was that it said former FBI Director John O'Neill, who died on his first day of the job on September 11th, as head of security at Larry Silverstein's World Trade Center. Larry Silverstein had purchased the World Trade Center not very long before September 11th and took out a insurance policy that would pay him in the event that something happened to the World Trade Center. Of course, it did. And he became quite rich from the proceeds from the insurance after the World Trade Center collapsed, we'll say. And take note of the fact that Larry Silverstein is on record as saying that they made the decision to pull it. He was referring to Building 7, which was on fire but had not been struck by a plane. But Building 7 collapsed despite the fact that no plane had crashed into it and that the fires were not significant. When he used the term pull it is a term used for controlled demolitions. That's just a side note. Was that Epstein blackmailing from Mossad through the Maxwells? To bring plausibility to the theory that Epstein and or Ghislaine were running the child sex blackmail ring on behalf of the Mossad, we have to establish a clear link to the Mossad. One is Robert Maxwell via his daughter Ghislaine. The weight of the evidence, no pun intended, since Maxwell weighed 300 pounds. The weight of the evidence suggests that in 1991, the Mossad itself murdered Robert Maxwell after he allegedly tried to blackmail them into paying off his massive debts. And because of the implications of the revelations in the Samson option, Israel's nuclear arsenal, and American foreign policy by journalist Seymour Hersh that year, that Maxwell had been a secret spy for the Mossad, something that was not publicly known up until that point. Maxwell was apparently assassinated shortly after the publication of Hersh's book, after British Labour MPs George Galloway and Rupert Allison quoted before the House of Commons, excuse me, quoted before the House of Commons a portion of Hersh's book as it pertained to Maxwell and demanded an investigation into Maxwell and his Mossad ties. The Hersh citations, then free to be reported on by the press under parliamentary privilege, found their way into the British media, and Mossad's charade began to unravel. Hersh also revealed that one of Maxwell's Mirror editors, Nick Davies, had helped Maxwell and the Mossad betray former Israeli nuclear technician whistleblower Mordecai Vanunu. Mossad defector Ari Ben Menashe claimed in 1986 that Robert Maxwell Excuse me. Alerted the Israel embassy, Mossad, that Vanunu had given the Sunday Times a story exposing Israel's nuclear development in Dimona. Vanunu mistakenly thought that he was giving an independent news outlet the story of the decade. Instead, what he got was a Mossad honey trap, which resulted in the Mossad kidnapping Vanunu after being lured to Italy by a woman of the Mossad. Vanunu was then incarcerated for 18 years in Israel. These revelations, along with Maxwell's mountainous debt, ever-rising complications with his money laundering in the Soviet bloc, and his supposed blackmail of the Mossad, appear to have led to his assassination on the Lady Ghislaine, November 5th, 1991, just after the Hearst bombshell. Apparently, the Mossad had had enough of a man the Likud Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir once described as having done more for Israel than any other man on the planet. But remember, there was no honor among thieves. Many high-level operatives were murdered in the aftermath of the Iran-Contra affair, the affair itself being used expressly to help Israel arm Iran and Iraq as part of a balkanization scheme, which became known as the Yannan Plan. Israel also used the scandal to install Ronald Reagan as president, clearly the preferred choice of the Likud Shabbat syndicate. Donald Trump would go on to become Reagan 2.0 in 2016. Maxwell directly aided Yannan Plan Iran-Contra scandal by helping to arm Iran with weapons from Poland. Khrushchev was fully aware of Israel's interest in arming its enemies and played right along. Mossad KGB collaboration. So Iranians get to kill more Iraqis. Then when Tehran is on top, Israel starts to supply Baghdad so as to kill more Iranians. And then the picture here shows then Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir with Robert Maxwell in 1991. And it says Shamir also ran assassinations for Mossad from 1955 to 1965 and is believed to have been involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Ghislaine Maxwell went on record stating that her father was murdered, despite the botched investigation that tended towards either a suicide or accident conclusion. Ghislaine didn't hint at who might have carried out the hit. Would she go on only a few years later to help Mossad set up Operation Jeffrey Epstein, knowing that the very people she was working for might have killed her dad? Or did her father receive an state funeral in Jerusalem, attended by the Israeli government's top brass, fool her into thinking that Mossad was innocent of her father's death? More interestingly yet, perhaps she never volunteered to aid the operation in the first place, but was approached by the Mossad and obliged out of fear that she might meet a similar fate as her father. She could have detached herself from the past in order to gain what Mossad could have offered her. She was reportedly the most practical in her behavior after learning of her father's death. It seems she is not a woman ruled by her emotions. More Epstein-Maxwell-Mossad connections. Ooh. Another Mossad connection between Maxwell and Epstein is Ehud Barak, former Israeli prime minister. While working for Mossad and helping Soviet Jews immigrate to Israel, Robert Maxwell would meet with Barak, who was then director of Amman, Israel's military intelligence. After authorities sentenced Epstein for child prostitution in 2008, they discovered a black book containing, that's what I'm saying, this information has been out here for a long time. After authorities sentenced Epstein for child prostitution in 2008, they discovered a black contact book containing names of many prominent people, some of whom Epstein is believed to have blackmailed. As well, it contained contact information for some of the child victims. Barak's name is in there. and it was circled by Epstein's former housekeeper, Alfredo Rodriguez, who since has died mysteriously, as being one of many to either witness or participate in Epstein's abuse of young girls. Also circled were the names of Trump, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Alan Dershowitz, among others. Henry Kissinger, a close friend of Robert Maxwell, was also listed in Epstein's book. And here on the right, you see Russian President Vladimir Putin shaking hands with Prime Minister Ehud Barak of Israel at the United Nations during the UN Millennium Summit, September 7th, 2000 in New York. Another potential Mossad connection with Epstein, also with Robert Maxwell, is late Jewish billionaire bankster Edmund Safra. In a long list of Iran-Contra Yanan players, Safra also appears to have been assassinated. In 1999, Safra's name and contact information were found in Epstein's Black Book. Safra was the owner of National Republic Bank of New York and helped Robert Maxwell launder money from the Soviet bloc. Maxwell's involvement in Soviet perestroika deception, in addition to Seymour Hersh's exposure of Robert Maxwell as a secret Mossad spy, Israel may have also feared what Maxwell might reveal about the Zionist-Soviet collaboration, as well as the perestroika restructuring of Russian communism for public consumption. Deception of which Maxwell would certainly have had knowledge, being a close friend of Khrushchev, one of the fake plotters used to legitimize perestroika and glasnost as authentic. Khrushchev helped Maxwell set up 600 companies through which to move dirty money around the globe. Some of that money was made from the theft of U.S. technology. The Soviet defector who exposed the perestroika plot, Anatoly Golitsyn, says this about Khrushchev. As a leading KGB official, he supervised the experiments with democratization in Czechoslovakia, and Poland. His KGB advisors worked closely with Czechoslovak and Polish security services. As deputy head of the KGB since 1978, Khrushchev has been intimately engaged in the preparation of perestroika. Before Maxwell became a media baron, he served both in British intelligence and in British Parliament as a Labour MP. Ideologically, he appears to have been the quintessential socialist Jew, except when it came to his own capitalist business. Maxwell even smoked specially rolled Cuban cigars on the order of Fidel Castro himself. So it was that Maxwell would go on to collaborate with the communists in the Soviet Union to help Jews colonize Israel and to help communists rob blind the proletariat. The Soviets began to issue visas to its Jews planning to immigrate to Israel following Maxwell's visits to, in collaboration with the Soviet Union. The astute reader will remember that the Soviet Union, next only to the United States, was the first to recognize the illegal state of Israel in 1948. I won't get into it here, but it is well established that communism and socialism are constructs designed to advance exclusively Jewish interests. True. Maxwell, and almost certainly Mossad, could have been part of the Soviet development of the perestroika deception, the fake collapse of communism designed to bring down the guard of the West. The perestroika deception, and just for those who may not know, what he's referring to as perestroika was Gorbachev basically deciding to tear down the walls of Berlin and dismantle the Soviet Union. supposedly. And so that was the perestroika was considered to be a new era of peace, which was to bring an end to the illusion of conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States. The Mossad's motto, after all, is by way of deception, thou shalt do war. Could Maxwell's alleged blackmail of Mossad have involved disclosure of Israel's collaboration with the Soviets in their perestroika fraud? It seems that such a revelation would have been more detrimental to Israel's long-range global plan, especially in light of their immense alliance with Russia today, than anything Mossad defectors Victor Ostrovsky and Ari Ben-Menashe revealed as motives. Not to say that what they revealed wasn't significant. It certainly was. There you see Robert Maxwell with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev in 1978. And their hero Lenin looming above them in the picture. Golitsyn summarizes the role of agents of influence like the late Robert Maxwell and U.S. President Donald Trump working in tandem with Soviet perestroika initiatives. These KGB assets will be used to generate Western support for perestroika in the USSR and Eastern Europe, and also to prepare a favorable climate for restructuring in convergence with the United States, Europe, and the Third World. The ultimate objective is Lenin's replacement of nation states with collective regional governments as building blocks of the new world social order, the world communist government. What the West fails to appreciate is that the motive for doing so and for introducing controlled democracy is to stimulate changes in the Western system and facilitate the convergence of the two systems with a view to the eventual absorption of the Western democracies within a world government. Thus, you see the close relationship between Donald Trump and our man, Vladimir Putin. Israel's use for perestroika is part of the world governance strategy, which involves the leadership of the rising Eurasian power or BRICS hierarchy. And let me stop here as well. The BRICS hierarchy, and I wanted to stop here on that one, was because the same person who had proclaimed that Donald Trump was going to bring down the Rothschilds in the same way that Putin has alleged to do so. He was also touting BRICS as a means to be able to bring that about. And I pointed out to him that BRICS itself was created by Goldman Sachs, which is a chief arm of the Rothschild banking establishment. Okay, so just to put that into context. So it says Israelis' use for perestroika is part of the world governance strategy, which involves the leadership of the rising Eurasian power or BRICS hierarchy, with a self-proclaimed chosen people ruling it all. That's the same thing that Brother Steve Coakley said. The Jews call it Olam Haba, the world to come. their messianic kingdom on earth with Gentiles as their footstool. Again, same thing that Brother Steve said. Rest in peace, Brother Steve. No doubt, Maxwell used his vast influence through his media empire not only to portray Israel as a good guy, but also to perpetuate the legacy of Gorbachev's perestroika deception. The media, after all, were the Western world's only disseminators of what went on in the Soviet Union. Thomas and Diller revealed Khrushchev as saying Comrade Maxwell is going to be a good friend of this country. Maxwell replied that he would be glad to tell the world how much the Soviet Union was changing. Maxwell would go on to purchase the English-speaking Soviet paper, the Moscow News. The newspaper had been Maxwell's attempt to embrace the liberating policies of Mikhail Gorbachev. Both saw the newspaper as a means to promote perestroika. Gorbachev was deeply grieved by Maxwell's death. And here we see Mr. Donald Trump with Ivana Trump visiting the Palace Square in St. Petersburg, Russia, or USSR as it was then. This is the same year Trump and Jeffrey Epstein became friends. The Steele dossier alleges that St. Petersburg was another city in which Trump was sexually compromised by Russian compromat agents. And that's where the alleged pictures of him, I think, urinating on a couple of prostitutes in a bed were taken. Did Maxwell pass on sexual blackmail of Trump to the Soviets? If Robert Maxwell or even his daughter Ghislaine had blackmail material on Donald Trump, either from Jeffrey Epstein's various compromat clubs or other sources, what are the chances that it was passed on not only to Mossad, but also to the Soviets? Perhaps the Mossad originally contracted it out to the Soviets, and Maxwell joined the fray later, or Soviet blackmail of Trump may have been a backup to Mossad's. We may never know. But the highly controversial Christopher Steele dossier tends to corroborate this theory, as well as Galiskin's perestroika deception hypothesis, something both the left and right-wing media completely ignore. Unfortunately, those on the right have been kept from reading the dossier by way of deception. They have been told that it was invented by the Democratic Party, which it doesn't appear to be. The dossier appears to be authentic and is a must-read for truth seekers. The Steele dossier discusses Trump's sexual compromises taking place in Russia, i.e. Pissgate, which isn't hard to believe. It doesn't say exactly how far back the compromise of Trump extended, but it's likely to have gone back many years, as Trump has been involved with the Russians for a long time. Maxwell's protege, Epstein. Like Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein, Robert Maxwell was considered, I didn't know that. Like Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein, Robert Maxwell was considered a sexual predator by at least one lover of his. Also, like Ghislaine and Epstein, he was no stranger to bugging. Maxwell had bugged his own offices, even restrooms at the Daily Mirror, in order to snoop on his employees. It seems that Ghislaine sees in Epstein the image of her father. Is this the reason she aids and abets his criminal activities? Or is it because, as the ringleader, she needs him? Perhaps a little bit of both. And here's Ghislaine with Abigail Kilm, Chief Brand Officer of Ivanka Trump's clothes and accessories line, at the Felix Ray Valentine's Day party at the Core Club in New York City. Maxwell at Chabatinnik. In the previous installment of this series, we learned how Soviet power changed only in name from the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to an organized crime syndicate controlled by the Hasidic Jew Chabad Lubavitch, with which Donald Trump is deeply entangled. Although Maxwell's upbringing was in a Hasidic Jewish household, there isn't a lot of evidence linking Maxwell to the Chobotniks. In 2015, Chabad headquarters published an article linking Maxwell with Chobotnik Rabbi Yitzhak Izzy Kogan. Emotionally difficult though it was, Izzy nevertheless returned to Russia and put his street smarts to work, negotiating with diplomats and private philanthropists to facilitate the dramatic airlift of 226 children from the Chernobyl area to Israel. He reached out to Maxwell and Armand Hammer, who sent their own aircraft to evacuate the children since Russia refused to provide its own carrier. After several tense days during which the children were kept waiting in the Minsk airport with 400 frustrated parents, they finally arrived in Israel to great fanfare. And I might note that Armand Hammer is was an investor who owned Occidental Petroleum Company and had deep ties to Russia even during the Soviet period, and often flew and spent time in Russia, despite the fact that the United States and the Soviet Union were in a Cold War. And my brother Steve Coakley has done an excellent piece discussing Armand Hammer. Okay, so we'll leave this article, and let's go to Facebook. Yeah. And unfortunately, I had the page that I wanted to focus on pulled up, but now we have to scroll to it. So just bear with me for a minute. But I hope you found that we've covered quite informative. I learned some new information as well. But again, I want to point out, as I made the point earlier, that this is not new information. So it is really just kind of frustrating and maddening that we hear people both from the left and right clamoring for the Epstein files to be released as if it's going to reveal new information. This information has been there for a long time. You can go online now and read the lawsuits that have been filed against Trump and Epstein, alleging that they were both involved in sexually abusing women and children. This is all public information that's out there. We don't really even need more information to be revealed. I'm sure there's a plethora of information in the so-called files, but much of the information is already in the public domain. Okay, hopefully we can hear this.
We are being told by the White House that Epstein didn't have a client list, wasn't tied to any kind of intelligence, no human trafficking. A lot of people are sitting there saying, what are you talking about? It's been trending, not for one day, now about a week and a half, and they keep pushing it back. So I said, listen, let's do a little bit of due diligence and just kind of do a Epstein file like we did a Diddy file. Here's what we find out. Do you know Epstein owned an 8,000-acre property in New Mexico? Do you know what he actually did in that property? Nobody talks about that. Very weird. Do you know what Epstein did with his money 2 days before he died? Do you know what he did with his nearly $600 million in assets? Do you know the private residence that they say he owned, the most expensive private residence in Manhattan? Nearly $100 million. Do you know how he got it? Do you know how he got the property? Do you know about it? A lot of weird things. And a lot of people have been saying things about this guy for a long time. We're going to talk about it today. If you give value out of this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. So watch this. There seems to be a pattern that this guy Epstein was untouchable. Remember back in the days, the mob movie, The Untouchables? It sounds like this guy was untouchable. Why was he untouchable? Why did a lot of people say he can't touch him? Here's Alex Acosta. He was a U.S. attorney who proved the deal, reportedly told Epstein's transition team the following. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and leave it alone. Don't bother this topic. This is a July 2019 article from the Daily Beast. Then you have Cindy McCain, John McCain's wife. January 2020, she said at a conference, Epstein was hiding in plain sight. We all knew about him. We all knew what he was doing, but we had no legal aspect that would go after him. They were afraid of him for whatever reason. They were afraid of him. That's her. Julie K. Brunt, investigative reporter for Miami Herald. There were all these powerful people who knew and they looked the other way. Here's another one for you. Vicky Ward, journalist who profiled Epstein for the Vanity Fair. My editors removed damning quotes from young women who were victimized by Epstein. Everyone knew he was dangerous. Why? Why are they so afraid of this guy? Why can't they talk about this guy? Anyways, so this guy dies. When he does, net worth roughly $600 million. $77 million was a Manhattan mansion that we're talking about, the most expensive private residence in Manhattan. $63 million was the island, the Little St. James. 18 to 25 million was a Zorro Rancho when we talk about 8,000 acres in New Mexico. 12 to 15 million Palm Beach Estate. Paris apartment, 8 to 10 million. Aircraft, roughly 10 million with the helicopter. Art, cash, jewelry investments, $300 million. This guy was 577. How the hell did you make that kind of money? What did he do? So if you go look at his background and his past, you'll notice this guy was born in Brooklyn in 1953 to working class Jewish parents. Father worked at New York City Parks. Epstein attended Lafayette High School, skipped 2 grades, and then attended Cooper Union and then NYU, but never graduated from NYU. At 14, he attended the Elite Interlochen Center for the Arts on a music scholarship. Epstein later on used this affiliation to recruit girls into his trafficking ring, allegedly, that you read about, and even built his own lodge there. Then in 1974, he began teaching math and physics at Dalton, an elite Manhattan prep school. He was hired by Donald Barr, who is Bill Barr's father. By the way, Bill Barr's father wrote something very interesting. He wrote a book called Space Relations, a scientific fiction novel in 1973, set in a future where humans have formed an intergalactic empire ruled by aristocrats, where they ruled over and engaged in coercive acts with enslaved individuals, including teenagers, in a breeding clinic. Little weird. What book did your dad write? My dad wrote this book about, you know what I'm saying? A book about, enslaving individuals and engaging in coercive acts, including teenagers in a breeding clinic. Oh, okay, normal dad. Everybody's dad writes stuff like that. I mean, my dad wrote a book like that. You understand what I'm saying? That's a little weird when you go to, but what does Bill Barr have to do with this? We'll come back to this. So now later on, he goes to Bear Stearns, starts working there, enters into the financial network 76 to 81. So at the time, he starts working with Alan Greenberg at Bear Stearns, becomes a partner in 1980 due to his skill in tax law, then insider training and mysterious exit. In 1981, he all of a sudden resigns. Suspicious circumstances during an SEC investigation into insider trading linked to Seagram attempt takeover of St. Joe Minerals, an operation involving the Bronfman family. He was never charged, but was interviewed by the SEC, which was skeptical of his denials. Then, according to Stephen Hoffenberg and other sources, Epstein worked closely with British arms dealers at Sir Douglas Lease and Saudi arms trafficker Adnan Khashoggi. This operation tied to Iran-Contra era funneled Chinese Norinco weapons to Iran. Epstein allegedly learned money laundering and armed trading during this period, working with Stephen Hoffenberg. Then after that, the Mossad links. Epstein was introduced to Israeli intelligence circles by Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. According to ex-Mossad operative Ari Ben Manasseh, he was approved by higher-ups in Israeli military intelligence and began participating in Israeli arms deals. So this next one, a very interesting mentor here that even when I interviewed his brother, Mark Epstein brought this name up, Stephen Hoffenberg, the Hoffenberg era in the financial front from 87 to 93. Epstein partnered with Hoffenberg in a massive Ponzi scheme via Tower Financial. Though Hoffenberg went to prison, Epstein escaped prosecution. Hoffenberg later claimed that Epstein was the mastermind and the key figure in laundering those stolen funds. Nothing happened to him. Fast forward. Now he gets linked up with this guy named Wexner. Remember how earlier I talked to you about how did he end up getting the most expensive private residence in Manhattan? You're about to find out how this happens. So he goes and starts working with Wexner. He becomes his protege. Epstein gained enormous influence as financial manager for Leslie Wexner, billionaire founder of L Brands, which Victoria's Secret's one of them. Epstein helped Wexner acquire manage real estate projects with links to shadowy entities. Wexner, allegedly, this billionaire, ends up firing his entire financial team and handed Epstein enormous power over his fortune. You know what kind of power? Power of attorney? What? To who? To Epstein? Yeah. So power of attorney means he can make decision on this billionaire's behalf? Yes. Why? I don't know. It's kind of weird. And then what did Wexner do at the end? Well, Wexner ended up giving the most expensive private residence to him as a gift? Yeah. Gift? Yeah. A $77 million gift? Yeah. Why? Was this a son? That's a son, right? No relation. Blood? No. Why would he do that? He was questioned later and he said it was an economic arrangement. A 21,000 square foot penthouse is an economic arrangement? Yes. And what did he put on the balance sheet that he paid him? Zero. It's a gift. Then you got a couple other things comes up. Mar-a-Lago, he's there. One of the workers there, Virginia Giuffre, who was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell, who's a Mar-a-Lago spa attendant. And then there's connections there. And then later on, when Trump finds out what happens with Epstein, Virginia Giuffre goes with them. Later on, when Trump finds out what happened with Epstein, October of 2007, he banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, can't come back. So that's that relationship.
Okay, I interrupted it here because there's some conflicting information about why Epstein was banned from Mar-a-Lago. Trump at one point claims that he banned him because he was a creep. But in recent days and in other prior interviews, Trump said that the reason that he banned him from Mar-a-Lago was because Epstein was stealing his personnel from Mar-a-Lago to have them be employed at his residence, on the island. So what made him a creep that ended up getting him banned was that he was stealing Trump's personnel. Now, we know the type of personnel that Epstein was interested in, do we not? Those were underage girls, teenagers, who were previously employed by Trump at Mar-a-Lago.
That's taking place. So then we have Bill Clinton. And when it comes down to Bill Clinton on flight logs, he flew with Epstein 26 times. 17 times Epstein visited the White House. Multiple times he went with Epstein to his private residence and to his island. On many occasions, Secret Service wasn't with him. Little weird when you're having that kind of connections. Epstein was reportedly involved in raising funds for the Clinton Foundation, and their financier ties may have included shared donors like Lex Wexner. And then you got Prince Andrew. We've seen the pictures all over the place with a young Virginia Giuffre that's over there. And, when he was going through what he was going through, the British intelligence played a role in protecting the royal family from full scandal. His connections to the elite power players made him a liability, but also useful leverage for intelligence operations tied to Epstein's blackmail ring. Then this continues with more names. Gates, Wife gets a divorce from him and says, I don't like the fact that it was too close to Epstein. And when they're asking Gates like, yeah, she was probably right. I shouldn't have spent time. But he spent time with him after the 2008 conviction, despite claiming otherwise. Meetings were documented on 2011 and 2013, often in Epstein's Manhattan mansion. What do you do after? At least if it's pre, you're going even after. Like, you can't even go afterwards saying, I'm going to meet with Epstein. Wife leaves him publicly. She says, I didn't feel comfortable with the relationship. It's a little bit too public. And these stories can continue going with the way it's used with other people. You've heard names with MBS and others. You know, there's been pictures with Musk and Ghislaine. But again, Musk could be simply at a party that's hanging out with other billionaires that they're there. Musk himself called the idea absurd and radioactive, stating Epstein never advised me on anything, because Epstein apparently, described himself as an advisor during an intense period that they're negotiating certain things. Elon didn't like that. Leon Black, this one's a little bit weird with Epstein, co-founder of Apollo Global, later became a top executive at BlackRock after 2006. In 2019, Senator Ron Wyden released a letter detailing Black's financial relationship with Epstein. Ready for this one? Remember how that one guy, Lex Wexner, gave him a $77 million most expensive private residence in Manhattan? Look at this one here. Leon Black paid Epstein $158 million between 2012 and 2017 for consulting services, and paid an additional $20 million explicitly for a trust transaction that saved him $600 million in future tax liabilities. Maybe it's right. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe that's what he did. Little weird to pay $158 over a 5-year period. And then this continues, different visits. Former Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Israel between 2013 and 2017, frequent visits. Again, Barack visited Epstein's home in New York about 30 times between 2013 and 2017. 30 times. Maybe they're talking intel. Maybe they're talking investments. Maybe they're talking taxes. Maybe they're talking the most recent trade Yankees he's not happy about. I don't know. Maybe they're talking why the Knicks haven't won a championship since 72. Could be.
Now, remember, in the book, Dead Men Tell No Lies, about Jeffrey Epstein, it told a story of being in Epstein's kitchen, and Ehud Barak was there having coffee with Epstein, and it recorded a conversation that he had. And from reading that particular chapter, it was apparent that Epstein was close friends with Ehud Barak. And it also made the point that Trump was one to also frequent and just come walking into Epstein's kitchen as well, just as good friends would do.
A lot of different things they're talking about. In one notable trip in 2014, Barak flew with Epstein from Palm Beach to Tampa on Epstein's private island. What are they doing? They're talking business speculation. I have no clue. Little weird, that many visits. Somebody may say, well, he's Jewish. So once you become wealthy, I mean, you're eventually going to be tied to whatever national. Okay, I'm Armenian. I'm tied to I'm a Syrian. Yes, that does kind of make sense. At this level, who knows? Maybe it is. It's a little weird. It's a little suspect. You have to put it out there. Here's a former Israeli intelligence officer, Ari Ben Menashe, has made several striking claims about Epstein's role as intelligence asset, primarily for Israel's Mossad. Here's a small little assessment that he made. His assertions. You ready? Number one, Epstein and Maxwell were part of Mossad-run operations. He told investigative journalist Zev Shalev that he was introduced to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in the mid-'80s by Robert Maxwell, a figure that had deep ties to Israeli intelligence. According to Ben, Epstein and Maxwell were already working with Israeli intelligence at the time, and that's in the mid-'80s. Then honey trap operations, compromise collection. He described Epstein's sex trafficking enterprise as deliberate honey trap operation offering sexual encounters and underage girls to powerful individuals as a means to gather compromising material, allegedly using to blackmail them on behalf of Mossad. And in part of Maxwell's circle and Iran-Contra connections, Ben also claimed that network included Maxwell, Daily Mirror editor Nick Davies, and himself, including that Epstein and Maxwell were integrated into continuing Mossad-linked operations stemming from Iran-Contra arms and espionage dealings. This guy's an intelligence officer. I just recently had a guy, John Kirop, on the podcast. He was a first CIA officer to come out and speak against the president for waterboarding, went to jail for 23 months. This CIA officer, whistleblower. So do you trust him? It's up to you. This is coming from a guy that's on the inside, like giving stuff like this. Now, the pushback denials. Naftali Bennett, former Israeli prime minister, has categorically denied these claims. He stated with 100% certainty that Epstein never worked for Mossad and that the speculation to the contrary is categorically and totally false. Do you believe him? Maybe. I had the former Mossad director of Mossad interview I did 5 years ago, but he was a director of Mossad from the 80s. I couldn't get nothing out of him when I spoke to him. It was very interesting how he interviewed. You're either going to sit here and say, you know what, I believe it, or I don't. Great. It's your position. This other part, you have to almost put in here, if you're making the argument, you make a decision for yourself. Guy named Michael Baden, sketchy doctor, a lot of people say, but some people also give him credibility. He's the only guy that did the autopsy on JFK, Martin Luther King, O.J. Simpson, on what happened with Nicole, Phil Spector, Jeffrey Epstein, and George Floyd. Okay, here's what he said. JFK assassination, concluded JFK was shot from behind, supporting single shooter theory. Okay, MLK, upheld that James Earl Ray was likely the lone shooter. All right. O.J. Simpson suggested murders occurred later than prosecution claimed, questioning wound patterns. All right. Phil Spector argued the victim may have committed suicide, theory rejected by jury. Jeffrey Epstein disputed official suicide ruling, said injuries consistent with homicidal strangulation. Homicidal strangulation? Yes. George Floyd concluded death was due to asphyxia from sustained neck and back compression. What Derek Chauvin had his knee on his neck, that's what they're talking about. Now here's a kicker before I say anything. Watch this. Jeffrey Epstein, the conclusion he came up with saying it's homicide, not suicide, he was hired by Epstein's brother to observe the autopsy. George Floyd, when he said it was on Chauvin, not anything else, that's after this Michael Baden guy was hired by Floyd's family for independent autopsy. And if I go back and look at O.J. Simpson, that was after he was hired by defense expert witness. Same with Phil for JFK, hired by the HSCA forensic panel. So it seems like whoever hires him, he favors the autopsy towards them. I'm putting that out there, and I'm trying to find out what's going on with Epstein. I don't know if this Michael Baden guy gives me a lot of credibility. And then we got to do the timeline to see what happens here. July 23rd, 2019, Epstein found injured and semi-conscious in his cell with marks on his neck. Okay. Officials weren't sure if it was suicide attempt or assault. He was placed on suicide watch at the Metropolitan Correction Facility in New York. 6 days later, Epstein's removed from suicide watch. He's transferred to psychological observation, a less stringent status. The decision was made despite his prior injury and the high-profile nature of the case. Little weird. July 30th through August 8th. This is for the next week. Epstein is moved to Special Housing Unit, SHU. He is assigned a cellmate, Nicholas Tartagliano, a former cop facing quadruple homicide charges. Little weird. Tartagliano was the same cellmate when Epstein was found injured on July 23rd. All right, now we go to August 9th. Friday afternoon, Tartagliano is transferred out of Epstein's cell, reportedly at Epstein's request. This left Epstein alone in his cell, which violated MCC protocol for high-risk inmates. At this point, he was no longer under suicide watch or close monitoring. Suspect. Day later, August 10th. Epstein is found dead at 6:30 in the morning. He had apparently hanged himself with a bed sheet from the top bunk. No guard had checked on him for 8 hours. Surveillance cameras malfunctioned, and the 2 guards on duty fell asleep and falsified logs. And the government, Pam Bondi, releases the video, and there's a 1-minute break. It was like, wait a minute, we know somebody edited and messed with this at the 1-minute break. And then she tried to explain it to say, well, that's just typical what they've been doing for the last, decade plus. They typically have a minute before midnight that they do this with. Minute before midnight. He was dead at.
And I read it was actually 3 minutes missing. And if you recall as well, I maintain that Jeffrey Epstein, being a Mossad asset, was extracted from prison. He was not killed. I maintain he was extracted.
At 6:30 in the morning. It's kind of weird what's going on there. And she said, well, we didn't find anything. The only thing we found is a lot of child porn, which we will never release to the public. That's what people are asking. This is kind of weird. Everybody told us there was something. All of a sudden, there's nothing. Now, watch this. And by the way, while I'm shooting this video, it's so crazy. And I'm going to show you updated right now while I'm shooting this video. Now we're getting an article from Wired. According to Wired, it wasn't just 1 minute that was cut. Further analysis shows that one of the source clips was approximately 2 minutes and 53 seconds longer than a segment, including the final video, indicating that the footage appears to have been trimmed before release, and the amount of time is 3 minutes, not 1 minute that was cut. So give me a break. What can you do in the 3 minutes? A lot of stuff. By the way, 2 days before he killed himself, allegedly, committed suicide. You know what he did 2 days before he killed himself? Epstein's estate transferred $577 million into a trust he created 2 days before his death. And it was called the 1953 Trust. Why 1953? That's the year he was born. A little weird. 2 days before, kind of weird. Either you are like fully prepared or it's a little weird. Remember how earlier we were talking about Bill Barr connection with the dad and all this other kind of little weird, Bill Barr, New York Times called him the ultimate cover-up general. New York Times called him that in 1992 when they were going through a complete different thing. Imagine Bill Barr's being called the cover-up general 33 years ago by New York Times. Damn! That kind of a reputation for this long. Bill Barr's role as Attorney General during Epstein is extremely significant. Why? Because some are calling this the ultimate potential intelligence cover-up. His background, past behavior in the context of Epstein's death led to many describing Barr as a CIA fixer or the guardian of the deep state. Again, allegedly, we're not saying this is the case. That's what people say, but New York Times, if you had someone called you New York Times in 1992 and something happens, fast forward 2019, that's a long time to have that kind of a reputation. He started in the CIA in the 70s while still in law school. Throughout his career, maintained close ties to the intelligence and national security circles. George Bush, CIA director turned president. Barr was the AG during the final years of Bush 41 administration. That's how long he goes back. He pardoned key Iran-Contra figures, effectively shutting down deeper investigations into covert arms and drug operations. And Epstein was arrested in July 2019 and died just 1 month later. Barr returned as Attorney General February of 2019, 5 months before that. Little weird. You can say whatever you want to say about this thing here. It's also another thing we need to put into evidence as we're doing the Epstein files. And by the way, that money that, the 2 days before he died, he moved the $577 million into the 1953 trust. That $577 million moved all the way down to $40 million. Just recently, January of 2025, the estate received another $112 million in a tax refund. Now the money is back up to $145 million. Used to be at $40 million. Little weird that the money is still moving around. And a couple names in this case you got to be looking at: attorney and accountant Darren Indike and Richard Kahn. And in the back end, as a backup, is a guy named Boris Nikolic. Boris Nikolic's background, what he does is another complete weird connection that you got here. Anyways, just a lot of stuff here on why the money is moving the way that it is. Now, let's look at what they found in their properties. In the New York one, they found some 170 cameras, hidden cameras everywhere, a fake Austrian passport. The Palm Beach property, there was hundreds of nude or suggestive photos, which, okay, somebody could say this guy has a fetish. He likes nude pictures. And then the one in Paris, one of the expensive ones, dozens of photographs on underage girls, electronic media, including CDs and hard drives that was found later on in New York. And then a contact list of high-profile European names. Okay, maybe it's connected there. But the place in New Mexico, kind of weird. Zorro Ranch in Stanley, New Mexico, 8,000 acres. You know what they found in this place? Obviously, cabin-style guest lodge in the desert, speculated to be used to isolating guests or girls, airstrip and helipad allowing discreet air travel. But watch this one. There was allegedly a secret underground structure or bunker. He used the ranch for eugenics and genetic experiments, including interest in transhumanism and seeding the human race with Epstein's DNA, reported by New York Times. What? Seeding the human race with Epstein's DNA, reported by New York Times. He had attempted to ingratiate himself with Los Alamos National Laboratory scientists and transhumanist researchers, possibly leveraging the ranch as a hub for influence or experimentation. Anyways, look, when you look at this, it's definitely a weird character. For you to come out and say there was no client list, there was nothing going on, there's a reason why The number of searches on him, according to CNN, is up 1,200%. One day was a number one trending topic on Twitter. Number two had 110,000 searches. Number one was 2 million, and it was the Epstein. People are interested and they're curious. This was not part of Trump's 47 plan, the promises he made when he ran for office. It was not on any of the 20 promises that he made. Not one of them had to do with this, but it was something that other people, Cash, Bongino, Bondi, other people kept talking about. Oh my God, you should see what is in here. Everybody became so interested. Of course, they're going to want to follow it. By the way, when names come up, oh my God, it's because Trump may be tied. You don't think Biden and Obama would have used it against him? If he had any ties, you don't think Biden and Obama would have just used this to say, hey, you better step out and not run for office, or else we're going to release this to everybody? They could have done that. How come they didn't do that? Why didn't they do that? And why did Trump play so aggressive as if nothing was going on? It's kind of weird.
The answer to that question, of course, is because they were in the files too. This is not a political issue. The establishment, the Rothschilds, control both sides, Republicans and Democrats. That's why there's never going to be a very passionate plea for the files to be released, because both parties have people who are compromised.
Weird, right? But we've seen pictures with him and Epstein and all this other stuff, and Musk with Epstein, Bezos with Epstein. When you start making money and you're succeeding, you're in a lot of weird parties that you go to, not weird as in Diddy parties that you don't know who's there. Oh, hey, meet John, this guy's a billionaire. Oh, hey, meet Bob, he's the king of this. Oh, that's how people talk to one another. I remember I had Mike Tyson one time on a podcast, and him and I are talking, and in the podcast, he tells a story about a guy that one time he's taking pictures in, I don't know where he's at, New York or somewhere. He's taking pictures with all these guys. A few days later, the FBI and the SWAT and everybody starts coming to him, or police, hey, to the gym, Mike, what's up? You took a picture with this guy? Yeah, I did. How do you know this guy? I don't know this guy. I just took a picture. But how do you know? I had no clue who the hell this guy. I'm just taking pictures with a bunch of different fans. Do you know this guy just killed 8 people and wounded 19 people? What did you say? Yes, this guy is Dale Hausner. That's who it is, yeah. Let's take a picture. Let's take a picture. Let's take a picture. So take everything that you have and throw 99% of it out. But all you need is 1%. And to me, that 1% is plenty that I want to know what happened with this guy. At 1%. Too many weird things that are linked to this guy that I want to know. That's me. I'm curious. Maybe you are as well. By the way, if you have any sources, if you know anything about Epstein, if you were ever connected with it, Connect me here. I'm curious. I actually want to know. If you want to be discreet and private so nobody will know, send me a Connect here. I want to know if you know anything that's going on with Epstein that maybe the public is not talking about, good or bad. Give me all of it. I'm interested. Connect me here. I will respond back to 100% of the messages. If you got value out of this video, give it a thumbs up.
Okay. We'll move on from that. That was very informative. Let's see. We'll go here.
And research shows from investigative reporting from the Miami Herald that Jeffrey Epstein was actually still on the Mar-a-Lago membership logs up to 2007. Okay, so Trump was still getting money from Jeffrey Epstein up to 2007. Jeffrey Epstein was still paying for his membership at Mar-a-Lago, according to the Miami Herald. And that, of course, is a year after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in Florida in 2006. So if
he kicked him out for being a creep,
yes,
that would have even been a year after that would have been established through a legal suit.
Correct. And there's been other now. And research shows from investigators.
And again, he didn't kick him out for being a creep. He kicked him out because Epstein was stealing Trump's personnel from Mar-a-Lago.
Reporting from the Miami Herald that Jeffrey Epstein was actually still on the Mar-a-Lago membership logs up to 2007. Okay, so Trump was still getting money from Jeffrey Epstein up to 2007. Jeffrey Epstein was still paying for his membership at Mar-a-Lago, according to the Miami Herald. And that, of course, is a year after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in Florida in 2006. So
a year after his arrest. Okay. Listen to this one.
Israel will have an absolute enormous amount on Trump.
Oops. Let's go back.
Israel will have an absolute.
This is David Icke. I'm not particularly a fan of David Icke, but I'm playing this because the information that he shares here is collaborated by other information that we've encountered during the course of this series. So I can attest to the veracity of the information that he shares here. Thus, I'm playing David Icke.
Enormous amount on Trump. He was so bankrupt, in for $1 billion. Wilbur Ross came in, still working for the Rothschilds at the time, organized 72 banks to bail out Trump. Trump is who Trump is because of that bailout. Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson has given him $100.
Now remember, if you go back to, I think it's the first two installments of Donald Trump Insider or Outsider or Establishment, we established the connection between Trump and the Rothschilds, and in particular, Wilbur Ross, who was instrumental in helping to orchestrate the negotiations that extricated Trump from his bankruptcy and developed a plan to get him out of bankruptcy and basically rehabilitate his profile. But then going even back further, it was Rothschild companies, including the Mary Carter Paint Company, which was tied to Rothschild family and the CIA, which led him to his first significant real estate property, which was the Taj Mahal Casino in New York. Oops, sorry about that.
Israel will have an absolute enormous amount on Trump. He was so bankrupt, in for $1 billion. Wilbur Ross came in, still working for the Rothschilds at the time, organized 72 banks to bail out Trump. Trump is who Trump is because of that bailout. Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson has given him $100 million for this election campaign. The strings of this, Donnie, moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Done. The Golan Heights of Syria becoming Israeli territory. Done. There's a location in the Golan Heights now called Trump Heights in appreciation. Part of that agreement, this has been reported in the Jewish press, Trump at some point in this presidency will sanction the Israeli annexation of the West Bank. Got most of it now anyway. And so you've got the blackmail, you've got the fact that he's beholden to them because they saved his backside, and you put that lot together and it's no surprise, is it, that he does whatever Israel tells him. The deep state wasn't vanquished when Trump came to power. It just changed its personnel.
I can wholeheartedly endorse that conclusion because we've uncovered that information and more about the connections of Donald Trump. So he's not an outsider. He's part of the establishment. He's part of the deep state. He is not a savior, as some people want to believe so desperately. Sorry to burst your bubble. It's just not true. Okay. We see Julian Assange, WikiLeaks. He says the reason we won't let the Epstein client list come out in court is if blackmail could no longer be useful, and the CIA would lose their control of decades of setting up. I think we'll hold because there's a lot more information that we have yet to be able to get to, and it'll probably take another hour at least to get through this information. So we're going to we went there. We're going to end that one. Maybe I'll play this one, and then we'll end this episode. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, this is a good one. We'll end on this one if it's not too long.
Ivana Trump was like her best friend.
And with
Ivana.
Yeah, with Ivana, then I described that you know, she'd be there. How
That
often?
was creepy. So at the time, Ivana had this. She was doing QVC, selling jewelry, right, online. I mean, on TV. She was like a QVC queen. Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was always hanging out with Epstein, and Ivana was always hanging out with Ghislaine.
Right.
And Ivana would say, "We're going to go pick up Ivana, or Ivana's going to come," and we'd ride in the car with her. And I remember one occasion where Ghislaine's like, "I have to get out right now," and she went and got a number from a child, and I saw in a uniform.
Yeah. And
Everybody knew what they were doing. Everybody who surrounded them knew exactly what they were doing.
And but how often? Did you go for rides often with her and Ivana? Or,
Yes.
And would she pick up girls all the time?
Yes. She didn't bring them in the car. She would get their phone numbers.
Right.
She would drive by schools
Right. So
as they got out.
So would she?
Yeah.
And what's Ivana doing at this point? What are
Sitting
they?
in the car. And I'll never forget, because one day I was really weirded out by what had happened. I was really weirded out. So I'm sorry, my phone's beeping in. Just give it a second. But anyway, I've got to go in a second. But I just wanted to tell you, I was weirded out when they were driving around with this. So Ghislaine, to shut me up, gave me one of those cheap bracelets Ivana was selling on QVC, and said, "Ivana wants you to have this." And I threw it in the garbage. Ivana Trump was like her best friend.
Okay, so I just wanted to play that one into the record as well, because it shows that Donald Trump, Ivana Trump, his wife then, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Epstein all hung out together. Maria Farmer, who was being interviewed here, she witnessed it. She was a victim of Epstein. She recalls in this interview riding around with Ghislaine Maxwell and Ivana Trump. And she recalls being in the car with both of them when Ghislaine was pulling up to schools to recruit young children for Epstein. Ivana Trump. So they all hung out together. Her allegation is that both Ivana Trump and Donald Trump, at the very least, were aware of what Ghislaine and Epstein were doing, if not involved in it themselves. So I'll leave it there. But the point I wanted to make is, with respect to Jeffrey Epstein, it's very well documented and has been very well documented for some time that there was a relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. This is not new information. It has been in the public domain since at least 2019, or whenever it was that he was that Jeffrey Epstein was on trial. Okay, this is not new information. You do not need the files to find this information out. It's always been in the public domain. And we've further gone into documenting the connection that Donald Trump has not only had with Epstein, but with Israel, with Russia, all of whom are, how do we want to refer to them? We'll use the word Zionists, have Zionist connections. And we know that those same Zionists are principal players in the so-called establishment, the deep state, going back to Lord Rothschild, who's a principal Zionist who created the Round Table Group along with Cecil Rhodes in his, I think, 7th will to establish the Rhodes Rothschild Secret Society. And we talked about how it was Round Table Group members, Lord Milner, Lord Rothschild, and who else was it? Lord Milner, Lord Rothschild, and what's that? I'm tired. What is that? The declaration that Lord Balfour, the Balfour Agreement. Lord Balfour, Lord Milner, Lord Rothschild, Lord Balfour were all part of the Round Table Group of the Rhodes Rothschild Secret Society, who basically laid the framework for the founding of Israel. Okay, so all of this is connected. And Donald Trump is deeply connected into that. Donald Trump is not an outsider by any stretch of the imagination. He is deeply entrenched in that. And there is leverage over him because he was deeply involved with Jeffrey Epstein, who likely had leverage on him, who now has turned that information over to the Mossad if that's not who he was working for. They have that information, and it looks likely that the intelligence of the former Soviet Union, Russia, who are controlled by the same people, have that information and leverage over Trump now. Okay, so yeah, sorry, he's not who you think he is. So with that, we'll conclude this episode. We'll, I guess, go on to part 13 the next time. And I'm going to stop sharing this. We'll come back here. And I'll invite you to purchase my book, which you can find on Amazon, The Book of Light. And remember, I do spiritual counseling. That's my primary mission. But, we do this series on Trump because part of being spiritual is to bring light, because we know that there are dark forces and we can eradicate the darkness through the light. We can't do so by ignoring it. So part of our mission is to point those things out. But then we also work in the light, and part of my unction, my purpose is to also help people on their spiritual journey. So if you find yourself in need of counsel in that regard, do please reach out to me. You can find me on my website, www.sa-ra.org, and you can sign up for a consultation with me. All right. So thanks for listening and watching. And I know that you found great illumination from the information that we provided. So we'll see you next time here on Journey into Self. Talk to you soon. Hotel.